From 1998 to 2003, a vicious killer was on the loose in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, taking the lives of at least 7 women. Though many believe his rampage started earlier and he is suspected of several other cases in the area. During this time, another monster, Sean Vincent Gillis, was also active in Baton Rouge, complicating the investigation. The primary method of attack was stabbing or slashing, though he also beat and strangled victims to death. The killer would either talk his way into the victim's home or break in, leaving no sign of forced entry, then assault his victims before killing them. Even as he killed, the monster committed a variety of less severe crimes such as robbery and trespassing, but his arrests for these crimes did not stop his more than 5 years of murder. Often, Sean Vincent Gillis is referred to as the other Baton Rouge serial killer. So who was the first to hold that title? Derrick Todd Lee, the Baton Rouge Killer.
Derrick Todd Lee was born in St. Francisville, Louisiana on November 5, 1968, to an abusive father and overbearing mother. His parents were not his only problem, however. Derrick was mentally challenged and was put into special ed classes. He was also mistreated by other kids who called him names based on this. Perhaps because of pressures at home and school, Lee began acting out at a young age. On November 8, 1981, at age 13, Lee was arrested for burglary and vandalism. He also assaulted a woman around the same time. At 16, he was arrested on suspicion of murder, but was released without being charged. He also attempted to commit insurance fraud by burning his car, and in July of 1988, he was arrested for robbery and served a brief sentence in jail. Also in 1988, Derrick met a woman named Jacqueline Sims, and the two got married on August 17. Their relationship was tumultuous, marked with domestic violence. On one occasion, Lee even threatened his wife's father with a gun. Life went on in this fashion for a while, with Derrick committing petty crimes until 1998, when his aggressive and violent tendencies led him to commit the murders he would become known for. But there are earlier murders that he is also suspected of committing. On April 18, 1998, a 28-year-old woman named Randy McBrewer disappeared from her home in Zachary, Louisiana. Her home was drenched in blood, but her body was never found. She lived just blocks away from another woman who was killed in August of 1992. 41-year-old Connie Warner's body was found in September of that year. The cause of death was a skull fracture that resulted from blunt force trauma. But a hurricane had washed away any evidence left by her killer, and this crime is considered unsolved, though Lee is strongly suspected. The second murder that Derrick Todd Lee is known to have committed occurred on September 23, 2001. The body of 41-year-old Gina Wilson Green was discovered the next day in her home near the campus of Louisiana State University. A coworker had come to check on her when Green did not show up for work that day. Investigators determined that she had been assaulted prior to being strangled. Her cell phone and purse had been stolen. 4 months later, on January 14, 2002, a man came home to find that his wife had been murdered. Geralyn Desoto was a 21-year-old LSU student. She had been beaten, stabbed, and slashed. Once again, the monster had assaulted the young woman before killing her. The pace of the known killings adds credibility to the theory that Lee had many more victims that have not been solved, based on the gaps in the known crimes. On May 31st, the killer struck again. Charlotte Murray Pace was another LSU student, and the 22-year-old was one of the youngest recipients of an MBA from the school. A roommate came home to a horrific scene. The apartment was drenched in blood. Pace had put up a heroic fight against her attacker, receiving defensive wounds in the process. In the end, she succumbed to blood loss after being stabbed more than 80 times in her neck, face, and torso. Police immediately suspected a connection to the Green murder, as the two women just lived a few blocks from one another, and DNA confirmed that they had indeed been committed by the same killer. The next person that Lee is known to have attacked survived the ordeal and was able to give police information about her attacker. On July 9, 2002, Diane Alexander was at home, alone, in Breaux Bridge. Derrick Todd Lee approached the rural home and asked the young woman if he could use her phone. Once Lee was inside and knew Diane was home alone, he attacked her. She was beaten severely, and Derrick began strangling her with a phone cord as he attempted to assault her. As he did so, her son got home and caught the creature in the act, chasing him from the house and catching a glimpse of the attacker's vehicle, a gold Mitsubishi Eclipse. After she had recovered enough to speak to police, Diane described her attacker so investigators could put together a composite sketch. This, along with DNA evidence, got the wheels turning for Derrick Todd Lee's eventual downfall and arrest. Only days later, on July 12th, Lee was once again on the prowl for a victim. 44-year-old Pam Kinnemore had been at her Briarwoods Estates home in Baton Rouge when she vanished. 4 days later, her body was discovered discarded under the Whiskey Bay Bridge. She had been assaulted, and her neck was cut so violently that her head had nearly been severed. Her husband had come home to find bloodstains and signs of a struggle. Once her body was recovered, the DNA was found to match some of the other open cases that investigators were working to solve. A length of telephone cord was found near the body, which came back as a match to the cord used in the attack on Diane Alexander. But in the time that it took for police to connect the crimes, the monster would take 2 more lives. 23-year-old Marine recruit Trinisha Dene Colomb was kidnapped from a cemetery as she visited her mother's grave on November 21, 2002. She was found 3 days later in a patch of woods near Lafayette by a hunter. She had been assaulted like the previous victims and beaten to death. Her cause of death was found to be blunt force trauma to the head. A pool of blood was found 30 feet from where she had been found, indicating that she had been dragged through the mud. The last known victim of Derrick Todd Lee was 26-year-old Carrie Lynn Yoder. She was kidnapped from her home, which was between the homes of Pace and Green, on the night of March 3, 2003. The body of the LSU student was found 10 days later in Whiskey Bay, close to where Pam Kinnemore had been discovered. The killer had beaten, stomped, and assaulted her before strangling her to death. Police believe she might have been thrown from the bridge. On May 5, 2003, investigators collected a DNA sample from Lee in connection with the murders of Connie Warner in 1992 and the murder of Randy Mabrewer. On May 22nd, Diane Alexander met with police to update the composite sketch, adjusting the hairline, and it was again shared through the media. This small change made all the difference, and calls began pouring in, pointing the finger at none other than Derrick Todd Lee. 3 days later, on the 25th, the DNA testing results came in. The DNA taken from Lee was found to be a match to that found on Gina Green, Charlotte Pace, Pamela Kinnemore, Trinisha Colomb, and Carrie Yoder. Diane Alexander immediately recognized Lee in a photo lineup. A warrant was issued, and his photo was circulated. Derrick fled Louisiana but was arrested in Atlanta, Georgia on May 27, 2003. The DNA evidence was too strong for the defense to overcome, and the guilty verdict was unanimous for the murder of Geralyn Desoto and Charlotte Pace, resulting in a death sentence. Due to the emotional strain on the victims' families of reliving their loved ones' last moments, prosecutors declined to push for additional trials. During the penalty phase for his convictions, it was argued that because Lee's IQ was below 70, he could not fully understand the seriousness of his actions. However, due to his work history and the fact that he was able to obtain a truck driving license, this argument was rejected, and he was sent to death row at the Louisiana State Prison in Angola in December of 2004. He later developed health issues related to heart disease that led to him getting a pacemaker. The condition worsened until January 21, 2016, when Derrick Todd Lee passed away in a nearby hospital. As an unfortunate update to this case, in 2019, Lee's son was involved in a shooting which left one dead. However, it was ruled as an accident and charges were not pursued.